For some moments during these lectures, we have looked together into one of the rooms of the house called Science. This is a relatively quiet room that we know as quantum theory or atomic theory. The great girders which frame it, the lights and shadows and vast windows, these were the work of a generation, our predecessor, more than 2 decades ago. It is not wholly quiet. Young people visit it and study in it and pass on to other chambers. From time to time, someone rearranges a piece of furniture to make the whole more harmonious. And many, as we have done, peer through its windows or walk through it as sightseers. It is not so old, but that one can hear the sound of the new wings being built nearby, where men walk high in the air to erect new scaffoldings, not unconscious of how far they may fall. All about, there are busy workshops where the builders are active, and very near indeed are those of us who, learning more of the primordial structure of matter, hope someday for chambers as fair and lovely as that in which we have spent the years of our youth and our prime. It is a vast house indeed. It doesn't appear to have been built upon any plan, but to have grown as a great city grows. There is no central chamber, no one corridor from which all others debouch. All about the periphery, men are at work, studying the vast riches of space and the state of affairs billions of years ago, studying the intricate and subtle but wonderfully neat mechanisms by which life proliferates and alters and endures, studying the reach of the mind in its ways of learning, digging deep into the atoms and the atoms within atoms and their unfathomed order. It is a house so vast that none of us know it, and even the most fortunate have seen most rooms only from the outside or by a fleeting passage, as in a king's palace open for visitors. It's a house so vast that there is not and need not be complete concurrence on just where its chambers stop and those of the neighboring mansions begin. It is not arranged in a line or a square or a circle or a pyramid, but with a wonderful randomness suggestive of unending growth and improvisation. Not many people live in the house, relatively speaking. Perhaps, if we count all its chambers and take residence requirements quite lightly, 0.1% of all the people in this world. Probably by any reasonable definition, far fewer. And even those who live here live elsewhere also, live in houses where the rooms are not labeled atomic theory or genetics or the internal constitution of the stars, but quite different names like power and production, evil and beauty and history and children and the Word of God. And we go in and out. Even the most assiduous of us is not bound to this vast structure. One thing we find throughout the house: there are no locks, there are no shut doors. Wherever we go, there are signs and usually the words of welcome. It is an open house, open to all comers. The discoveries of science, the new rooms in this great house, have changed the way men think of things outside its walls. We have some glimmering now of the depth in time and the vastness in space of the physical world we live in. An awareness of how long our history, how immense our cosmos, touches us even in simple earthly deliberations. We have learned from the natural history of the earth and from the story of evolution to have a sense of history, of time, and of change. We've learned to talk of ourselves and of the nature of the world and its reality as not wholly fixed in a silent, quiet moment, but as unfolding with novelty and alteration, decay and new growth. We've understood something of the inner harmony and beauty of strange and primitive cultures, and through this see the qualities of our own life in an altered perspective, and recognize its accidents as well as its inherent necessities. We are, I should think, not patriots less, but patriots very differently, for loving what is ours and understanding a little of the love of others for their lands and ways. We have begun to understand that it is not only in his rational life that man's psyche is intelligible, but that even in what may appear to be his least rational actions and sentiments, we may discover a new order. We have the beginnings of an understanding of what it is in man, and more so in simple organisms, that is truly heritable, and rudimentary clues as to how this inheritance occurs. We know in surprising detail what is the physical counterpart of the act of vision and of other modes of perception. Not one of these new ideas and new insights is so little, or has so short a reach in its bearing on the common understanding, but that it alone could make a proper theme for science and the common understanding. Yet we have been, bearing in mind my limited area of experience, in that one room of the house where physics is, in which I have for some years worked and taught. In that one room, in that relatively quiet room where we have been together, we have found things quite strange for those who have not been there before, yet reminiscent of what we have seen in other houses and known in other days. We have seen that in the atomic world, we have been led by experience to use descriptions and ideas that apply to the large-scale world of matter, to the familiar world of our school-day physics. Ideas like the position of a body, its acceleration, its impulses, the force acting on it. Ideas like wave and interference. Ideas like cause and probability. But what is new, what was not anticipated a half-century ago, is that, though to an atomic system there was a potential applicability of one or another of these ideas, in any real situation, only some of these ways of description could be actual. This is because we need to take into account not merely the atomic system we are studying, but the means we use in observing it, and the fitness of these experimental means for defining and measuring selected properties of the system. All such ways of observing are needed for the whole experience of the atomic world. All but one are excluded in any actual experience. In the specific instance, there's a proper and consistent way to describe what the experience is, what it implies, what it predicts, and thus how to deal with its consequences. But any such specific instance excludes by its existence the application of other ideas, other modes of prediction, other consequences. They are, we say, complementary to one another. Atomic theory is then in part an account of these descriptions, and in part an understanding of the circumstances to which one applies or another. And so it is with man's life. He may be any one of a number of things, but he will not be all of them. He may be well-versed, he may be a poet, he may be a creator in one or more than one science. He will not be all kinds of man or all kinds of scientist even. He will be lucky if he has a bit of familiarity outside that room in which he works. So it is with the great antinomies that through the ages have organized and yet disunited man's experience. The antinomy between the ceaseless change and wonderful novelty and the perishing of all earthly things, and the eternity which inheres in every happening, in the antinomy between growth and order, between the spontaneous and changing and irregular, and the symmetric and balanced, in the related antinomy between freedom and necessity, between action, the life of the will, and observation and analysis and the life of reason, between the question of how and the questions why and to what end, between the causes that derive from natural law, from unvarying regularities in the natural world, and those other causes that express purposes and define goals and ends. So it is with the antinomy between the individual and the community. Man was an end in himself, and man whose tradition, whose culture, whose works, whose words have meaning in terms of other men and his relations to them. All our experience has shown that we can neither think nor in any real sense live without references to these antinomic modes. We cannot in any sense be both observers and actors in any specific instance, or we shall fail properly to be either one or the other. Yet we know that our life is built of these two modes, is part free, part inevitable, is part creation and part discipline, part acceptance, part effort. We have no written rules that assign us to these ways, but we know that only folly and death of the spirit results when we deny one or the other, or when we erect one as total and absolute and make the others derivative and secondary. We recognize this when we live as men. We talk to one another. We philosophize. We admire great men and their moments of greatness. We read. We study. We recognize and love in a particular act that happy union of the generally incompatible. And with all of this, we learn to use some reasonable part of the full register of our own resources. We are, of course, an ignorant lot. Even the best of us knows how to do only a very few things well, and of what is available in knowledge of fact, whether of science or of history, only the smallest part is in any one man's knowing. The greatest of the changes that science has brought is the acuity of change. The greatest novelty is the extent of novelty. Short of rare times of disaster, civilizations have not known such rapid alteration in the conditions of their life, such rapid flowering of many varied sciences, such rapid changes in the ideas we have about the world and one another. What has been true in the days of a great disaster or a great military defeat for one people at one time, it's true for all of us now, in the sense that our ends have very little in common with our beginnings. Within a lifetime, what we learned at school has been rendered inadequate by new discoveries and new inventions, and the ways that we learned in childhood are only very meagerly adequate to the issues that we are called on to meet in maturity. In fact, of course, the notion of universal knowledge has always been an illusion. It is an illusion fostered by the monistic view of the world, in which a few great central truths determine, in all its wonderful and amazing proliferation, everything else that's true. We are not today tempted to search for these keys that unlock the whole of human knowledge and of man's experience. We know that we are ignorant. We are well taught it, and the more surely and deeply we know our own job, the better able we are to appreciate the full measure of our pervasive ignorance. We know that these are inherent limits, compounded, no doubt, and exaggerated by that sloth and that complacency without which we would not be men at all. But knowledge rests on knowledge. What is new is meaningful because it departs slightly from what we knew before. This is a world of frontiers, where even the liveliest of actors or of observers will be absent most of the time from most of them. Perhaps the sense was not so sharp in the village. That village we have learned a little bit about, but probably do not understand too well. The village of slow change and isolation and fixed culture, which evokes our nostalgia, even if not our full comprehension. Perhaps in the villages men were not so lonely. Perhaps they found in each other a fixed community, a fixed and only slowly growing store of knowledge, a single world. And that we may doubt, for there always seemed to be in the cultures of such times and places vast domains of mystery, if not unknowable, imperfectly known, endless, open. As for ourselves in these times of change, of ever-increasing knowledge, of collective power and individual impotence, of drudgery, of heroism, of progress, and of tragedy, we too are brothers. And if we were inheritors of 2 millennia of Christian tradition, understand that for us we have come to be brothers second by being children first, and that we may doubt, for there always seem to be in the cultures of such times and places vast domains of mystery, if not unknowable, imperfectly known, endless, open. As for ourselves in these times of change, of ever-increasing knowledge, of collective power and individual impotence, of drudgery, of heroism, of progress, and of tragedy, we too are brothers. And if we were inheritors of 2 millennia of Christian tradition, understand that for us we have come to be brothers second by being children first, we know that in vast parts of the world where there's been no Christian tradition, and with men who never have been and never may be Christian in faith, there is nevertheless a bond of brotherhood. We know this not only because of the almost universal ideal of human brotherhood and human community. We know it at first hand from the more modest, more diverse, more fleeting associations which are the substance of our life. The ideal of brotherhood, the ideal of fraternity, in which all men, wicked and virtuous, wretched and fortunate, are bound together, has its counterpart in the experience of community. Not ideal, not universal, imperfect, impermanent, as different from the ideal and as reminiscent of it, as are the ramified branches of science from the ideal of a unitary, all-encompassing science in the 18th century. Each of us knows from his own life how much even a casual and limited association of men goes beyond him in knowledge, understanding, in humanity, and in power. Each of us, from a friend or a book or by concerting the little we know with what others know, has broken the iron circle of his frustration. Each of us has asked help and been given it, and within our measure has offered it. Each of us knows the great new freedom, sensed almost as a miracle, that men banded together for some finite purpose experience from the power of their common effort. We are likely to remember the times of the last war, where the common danger brought forth in soldier or in worker, in scientist and engineer, a host of new experiences of the power and comfort, even in the most bleak undertakings, of common, concerted, cooperative life. Each of us knows how much he has been transcended by the group of which he has been or is a part. Each of us has felt the solace of other men's knowledge to stay his ignorance, of other men's wisdom to stay his folly, of other men's courage to answer his doubts and his weakness. These are the fluid communities, some of long duration when circumstances favored, like the political party or many a trades union, some fleeting and vivid, encompassing in the time of their duration a moment only of the member's life. And in our world, at least, they are ramified and improvised, living and dying, growing and falling off almost as a form of life itself. This may be more true of the United States than of any other country. Certainly the bizarre and comical aspects impressed de Tocqueville more than a century ago when he visited our land and commented on the readiness with which men would band together to improve the planting of a town, or for political reform, or for the pursuit or inter-exchange of knowledge, or just for the sake of banding together because they liked one another or didn't like somebody else. Circumstances may have exaggerated the role of the societies of the fluid and intense communities in the United States, yet these form a common pattern for our civilization. It brought men together in the Royal Society, in the French Academy, in the Philosophical Society that Franklin founded, in the family, in platoon, on a ship, in a laboratory, almost everywhere but in a really proper club. We think of these communities, no less than the larger brotherhood of man, as made up of individuals, as composed of them, as an atom is of its ingredients. We think similarly of general laws and broad ideas as made up of the instances which illustrate them and from an observation of which we may have learned them. Yet this cannot be the whole point. The individual event, the act, goes far beyond the general law. It is a sort of intersection of many generalities, harmonizing them in one instance, as they cannot be harmonized in general. And we as men are not only the ingredients of our communities, we are their intersection, making a harmony which does not exist between the communities, except as we, the individual men, may create it and reveal it. So much of what we think, our acts, our judgments of beauty and of right and wrong, come to us from our fellow men, that what would be left were we to take all this away would be neither recognizable nor human. We are men because we are part of, but not only because we are part of communities. And the attempt to understand man's brotherhood in terms only of the individual man is as little likely to describe our world as is the attempt to describe general laws as the summary of their instances. These are indeed two complementary views, neither reducible to the other, no more reducible than is the electron as wave to the electron as particle. And this is the mitigant of our ignorance. It is true that none of us will ever know very much, and most of us will see the end of our days without understanding in all its detail and beauty the wonders uncovered even in a single branch of a single science. Most of us will not even know, as a member of any intimate circle, anyone who has such knowledge. But it is also true that although we are sure not to know everything, and rather likely not to know very much, we can know anything that is known to man, and may, with luck and sweat, even find out some things that have not been known before to him. This possibility, as a universal condition of man's life, is new, represents today a high and determined hope, not yet a reality. It is for us in England and in the United States not wholly remote or unfamiliar. It is one of the manifestations of our belief in equality, that belief which could better be described as a commitment to unparalleled diversity and unevenness in the distribution of attainments, knowledge, talent, power. This open access to knowledge, these unlocked doors, these signs of welcome, are a mark of a freedom as fundamental as any. They give a freedom to resolve differences by converse, and where converse does not unite, to let tolerance compose diversity. This would appear to be a freedom barely compatible with modern political tyranny. The multitude of communities, the free association for converse or for common purpose, are acts of creation. It is not merely that without them the individual is the poorer. Without them a part of human life, not more or less fundamental than the individual, is foreclosed. It is a cruel and humorless sort of pun that so powerful a present form of modern tyranny should call itself by the very name of a belief in community, by the word communism, which in other times evoked memories of villages and village inns, of artisans concerting their skills, and of men of learning content with anonymity. Only a malignant end can follow the systematic belief that all communities are one community, that all truth is one truth, that all experience is compatible with all other, that total knowledge is possible, that all that is potential can exist as actual. This is not man's fate. This is not his path. To force him on it makes him resemble not that divine image of the all-knowing and all-powerful, but the helpless, iron-bound prisoner of a dying world. The open society, the unrestricted access to knowledge, the unplanned and uninhibited association of men for its furtherance, these are what may make a vast, complex, ever-growing, ever-changing, ever more specialized and expert technological world, nevertheless a world of human community. So it is, too, with the unity of science. that unity that is far more a unity of comparable dedication than a unity of common total understanding. This heartening phrase, the unity of science, often tends to evoke a wholly false picture, a picture of a few basic truths, a few critical techniques and methods and ideas from which all discoveries and understanding of science derive, a sort of central exchange, access to which will illuminate the atoms and the galaxies, the genes and the sense organs. The unity of science is based rather on just such a community as I have described. All parts of it are open to all of us. This is no merely formal invitation. The history of science is rich in example of the fruitfulness of bringing two sets of techniques, two sets of ideas, developed in separate contexts for the pursuit of new truth, into touch with one another. The sciences fertilize each other. They grow by contact and by common enterprise. Once again, this means that the scientist may profit from learning about any other science. It does not mean that he must learn about them all. It means that the unity is a potential unity, the unity of the things that might be brought together and might throw light one on the other. It is not global or total or hierarchical. Even in science, and even without visiting the room in its house called atomic theory, we are again and again reminded of the complementary traits in our own life, even in our own professional life. We are nothing without the work of others, our predecessors, others our teachers, others our contemporaries. Even when, in the measure of our adequacy and our fullness, new insight and new order are created, we are still nothing without others, yet we are more. There is a similar duality in our relations to wider society. For society, our work means many things. Pleasure, we hope, and for those who follow it, instruction for those who perhaps need it, but also, and far more widely, it means a common power, a power to achieve that which could not be achieved without knowledge. It means the cure of illness, the alleviation of suffering, easing of labor, the widening of the readily accessible frontiers of experience, of communication, and of instruction. It means, in an earthly way, the power of betterment. It's a riddled word. We are today anxiously aware that the power to change is not always necessarily good. As new instruments of war, newly massive terror, add to the ferocity and totality of warfare, we understand, for instance, that it is a special mark and problem of our age that man's ever-present preoccupation with improving his lot, with alleviating hunger, poverty, and exploitation, must be brought into harmony with the overriding need to limit and largely to eliminate resort to organized violence between nation and nation, and the increasingly expert destruction of man's spirit by the power of police, more wicked, if not more awful, than the ravages of nature's own hand, is another such power, good only, if never to be used. And just that the patronage of science by society is in large measure based on the increased power which knowledge gives. If we are anxious that the power so given and so obtained be used with wisdom, with love of humanity, that is an anxiety we share with almost everyone. But we also know how little of the deep new knowledge which has altered the face of the world, which has changed and increasingly and ever more profoundly must change man's views of the world, resulted from a quest for practical ends or an interest in exercising the power that knowledge gives. For most of us, in most of those moments when we were most free of corruption, it has been the beauty of the world of nature and the strange and compelling harmony of its order that has sustained and inspirited and led us on. That also as it should be. If the forms in which society provides and exercises its patronage for us leave these incentives strong and secure, new knowledge will never stop as long as there are men. We know that our work is rightly both an instrument and an end. A great discovery is a thing of beauty, and our faith, our binding, quiet faith, is that knowledge is good, good in itself. It is also an instrument. It is an instrument for our successors who will use it to probe elsewhere and more deeply. It is an instrument for technology, for the practical arts, for man's affairs. So it is with us as scientists, so it is with us as men. We are at once instrument and end, discoverers and teachers, actors and observers. We understand, as we hope others understand, that in this there is a harmony between knowledge, in the sense of science, that specialized and general knowledge which it is our purpose to uncover, and the community of man. We, like all men, are among those who bring a little light to the vast, unending darkness of man's life and world. For us, as for all men, change and eternity, specialization and unity, instrument and final purpose, community and individual man alone, complementary each to the other, both require and define our bonds and our freedom.